Welcome to It's No Accident, a podcast about the challenges of personal injury and wrongful death law in Florida, one of the nation's most complex legal environments.
You'll hear compelling stories about real cases from our law firm in Tallahassee that will help you better understand your rights and protect yourself from the negligence of others.
I'm Mark Nonni.
And I'm Jaeson Homola.
And this is
It's No Accident.
You know, obviously we do a lot of car wreck cases, and one thing that I'd say has become more prevalent, not just recently, I mean, it's been around for a while, though, is ride sharing, right? Like Uber, Lyft, and having car wreck cases, where, either people were passengers in the Uber or Lyft and the car wreck happened, or maybe, our client was in the other vehicle, so not in the Uber or Lyft, but got in a wreck with an Uber or Lyft car. And so what are, I know we both handled them. I know you've handled several of them, though. What are some of the ways that kind of case is a little bit different than just a standard old car wreck case where the two drivers own the vehicle and it's not like a taxi or rideshare situation?
Yeah, sure. And it's been interesting to see the evolution of the way that these types of ride-sharing cases have been handled in the personal injury context over the years, because when we first started practicing law, Uber wasn't a thing, Lyft wasn't a thing, ride-sharing wasn't a thing. So, we were kind of like, we started practicing law almost like right when these things started happening, maybe like, it's been like 10, 15 years ago that,
right.
The bigger cities started to see some of these ride-sharing companies come about, and this was a thing. And really the main difference that you'll see in this situation is the way that the insurance is handled.
Right.
What's available to the person that was injured in this sort of case, and it's changed. It's changed throughout the years. It was kind of the wild, wild west when these ride-sharing companies first started. I think they started out on the West Coast, and they're just. I think at the beginning there was no regulations whatsoever as to what insurance had to be on these Ubers, what sort of coverage that they had to provide to the passengers in the cars. And slowly but surely over time, state by state, legislation started getting put in place as to, if you want to operate your business in our state, these are the safeguards that you have to put in place as far as insurance coverages for the passengers that are in your vehicles. And I mean, it gets down into the pretty nitty gritty in the statutes, at least in Florida, as to what amount of coverage is required based on what type of action is being taken by the driver. There's like three different tiers of coverage that's available. And, the highest coverage being the coverage where if you're actually actively, you're an Uber driver, you have your machine on, you've actively got a passenger in your vehicle and you're driving around with the passenger in your vehicle. That's going to be, you're going to have the most coverage available to you if you get injured as a result of the negligence of the Uber driver in that situation. Mm-hmm. And then the second tier is like, if you get hit by an Uber driver and that Uber driver's at fault and they don't have anyone in their vehicle, but they're looking for somebody. Like they've got their app on and they're looking for somebody. And then I can't remember, I think there might be a third tier, and I may be wrong about this, I haven't looked at the statute in a while. There could be a third tier that actually says that, they have their app on, but they're not actively searching for somebody or something like that. So there's different tiers as to what coverage is available to the person that's injured as a result of the Uber driver. And other than that, I mean, it really turns in. It's from a motor vehicle wreck situation where you're injured as a result of a motor vehicle wreck. Other than the insurance coverages, it's really just turns into a pretty standard auto wreck case where who's at fault, who caused the wreck. But there's a whole host of other negligence issues that pop up in these ride-sharing, Uber, Lyft, whatever ride-sharing company it is type of case. You've got negligent entrustment type cases where should the person have ever been given the authority to drive drive an Uber in the first place? Was the car fit to be a vehicle that was driving for Uber? Right. And then we've also seen situations where there's like physical or sexual assault on the driver of the ride-sharing company. So what are some of the, in that context, other than the motor vehicle collision, what are the things to be on the lookout for other than just just a car wreck in these cases.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for any of those things, like you said, usually it would come down to notice and foreseeability. Like I know we've talked about in lots of different contexts, and in this situation, it would be, if, whether it's Uber or Lyft or whatever the company is, if they're going to have someone drive for them under their banner, so to speak, they have some duty to make sure that the person's a safe, responsible driver and that the vehicle is, a safe vehicle and it's not about to break down, right? And so you can definitely see claims being made that way. And again, it would have to come down to what did Uber or Lyft know, or how much investigation did they do? You know what I mean? If this was a situation where the person has, caused a bunch of wrecks and, has a bunch of speeding tickets, has a bunch of moving violations, caused a bunch of wrecks, they have an old beater that literally breaks down every other day, and then Uber or Lyft or whoever the company is still lets them be, a driver for them, then that's the kind of foreseeability or kind of notice you would need to be able to prove successfully that they should have known not to let this person be a driver, right? Versus, if it's a situation where the person, the driver has a completely clean record, has never done anything bad, in terms of moving violations or causing wrecks, and this was just like a one-off fluke thing, then the evidence isn't there to really support that, right?
Right.
And I'm pretty sure too, I haven't had to get as deep into this, or if I do, I can't remember off the top of my head, but in that situation, I think you also sometimes run into issues with arbitration clauses and the terms and conditions that you agree to when you download these apps, right?
Yeah.
Where they're basically trying to prevent you from being able to sue them and force you into arbitration.
Right.
Right.
Right. And then for people that are driving the Ubers, like the Uber drivers that are doing it as their full-time job or doing it as just a part-time gig on the side, you need to be cognizant of your own insurance policy that's on the vehicle, because when these ride-sharing companies first started, insurance companies were somewhat slow to react as well. In your own insurance company, as a plaintiff's attorney, we could get coverage from Uber and then look to the driver's insurance company too and get money from the driver's insurance company.
Right.
And now what we've seen, whatever be a decade after these companies started, the insurance company for the driver is very quick to point out their exclusion
Right.
in their policy that says, if you're actively engaged in driving for a ride-sharing company of any nature whatsoever, we're excluding coverage for any injuries that you cause to anybody
Right.
as a result.
Right.
So it's turned into a situation where, we're not able to go after the driver's insurance anymore. We're left with whatever insurance is available through Uber or the ride sharing. And now that I'm talking about it, this is not just in the context of like Uber or Lyft. This is also like DoorDash, or these food companies. And Uber does Uber Eats now too. Some of these ride-sharing companies have, used their platforms to also get into the food delivery service. But you've got drivers out on the road that are handling these gigs for all these different platforms, and they all have different coverages, and they all have different. There's exclusions in everybody's policies, so it can create this situation where there's a lot of different things to look at, a lot of issues that pop up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the companies have definitely, like you said, over the years become, I'd say, more and more, like the Uber and Lyft and those kind of companies have become more wise, so to speak, when it comes to doing different things to try to insulate themselves. Like we were talking about, like arbitration clauses, and then. But also, like the drivers are not employees, right? They're all 1099 contractors, so that they can't be held liable. Like normally, if you're a company and one of your employees does something negligent, then you could be sued because they were your employee, right? But so that's why they make them contractors, 1099s, so that kind of breaks that link and insulates them more. And I know and it's different state by state because every laws are different in each state. But I know there's lots of battles I haven't been personally involved in, but I've read about over the years where, and usually it's a situation where somebody gets paralyzed or somebody dies, the amount of insurance available through Uber or Lyft isn't even come close to touching the, medical bills or whatever. And so then they're trying to figure out a way to go after the actual company.
Right.
And I know there's been situations where that was successful. I think in other states it wasn't successful. It's just kind of a constant back and forth, so to speak, you know?
Yeah, and what it really boils down to is how that state's courts are going to determine whether the driver for the ride-sharing company is a contractor, a subcontractor, or an employee, because there's going to be differences in what sort of legal liability the ride-sharing company has based on whether it's an actual employee and they're doing employee-type tasks for this company as opposed to a subcontractor.
Right.
So it boils down to that a lot of times, and then also you'll look for situations where in a big damages case like that, you'll look like to the negligent entrustment,
Right.
negligent hiring sort of
Right.
situation where, and sometimes this doesn't bear any fruit. Sometimes you'll look into the past of the past driving history of the Uber driver, and they've got a clean driving history for 20 years or
Right.
whatever it is, and then you don't have a case here. But sometimes you'll look into the driving history of the ride sharing driver, and you'll see that they had 3 DUIs and they've had 15 speeding tickets, and was this even looked at before Uber allowed them to drive under their banner, so to speak, and,
Right.
and pick up people and drive all over the road. So those are situations in big damages situation where we're looking for further liability against the company and not just the insurance coverage.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
No matter your injury, Nonni Homola is here to help you recover. Visit noho.law today.